So, are you the type of person that could be just sitting there minding your own business, and all of a sudden you start to notice that your heart starts to beat a lot faster? And a few minutes go by and you notice that it's still beating kind of fast. In fact, it's getting faster. It's getting a little faster. And before you know it, your mind has you completely convinced that you're having a heart attack. Or what about this? What if you have a pain in your body? And at first it starts out as something really dull and weak, and you try not to pay attention to it, but you just can't help yourself. You become really fixated on that sensation, and it's the only thing that you can possibly think about. Does that sound familiar? So maybe these types of sensations could lead to you going to the doctor multiple times, even after they've told you over and over again, it's okay, it's just stress, it's just anxiety, but your mind does not want to hear that. It is already convinced, no, there is definitely something wrong with me. You got to be missing something. I need you to run these tests. I don't believe those tests. You need to run another set of tests. This is what we call a cycle of anxiety, and that is associated with a condition known as health anxiety. Sometimes there are professionals that refer to this as hypochondria, but that's more of an extreme example of health anxiety. More people fall into maybe a mid-level range to where this obsessiveness, this stressing, the anxiety, the worry about something being really wrong with them when they're experiencing physical symptoms, most people fall under the category of simple health anxiety. And one of the greatest things is just being able to name this condition. You may be suffering from this condition and have been suffering for a while, but it can be really disheartening when you feel like you don't even know what's going on. It can be very satisfying and validating to learn that there's a name for this condition, as well as some very distinct protocols that we can follow to be able to treat this condition, and you can actually recover from it. So let's talk about some of the characteristics of health anxiety, and then we'll talk about 3 things that you can start doing right away to start treating your health anxiety. Now, keep in mind, I have put together a full guidebook that you can find in the description of this video. So if you want more information, if you need more specific examples of how these things show up and how to identify them, and also very specific instructions on how to treat them, you can find them in the guidebook below. So let's talk about some of the characteristics. First is that you've got a preoccupation with some sort of acquired illness. So this is taking up a good chunk of your day where you're thinking about your physical symptoms. You may be making those doctor's appointments. Point being is that it's getting in the way of you being able to live the type of life that you want to live. The next characteristic is the somatic symptoms, or another way of saying this is the physical symptoms, such as tingling and numbness in your feet and hands, could be a lump in your throat, could be some difficulty breathing. And here's the thing to keep in mind about these types of symptoms is that actually what you could be experiencing, and most likely are, is an offset of adrenaline. This is the stress hormone that is released into your body whenever you have experienced something stressful in your environment. And here's the tricky part, is that the stress response can get triggered by thought alone. And that thought doesn't even have to be true. So you can have this adrenaline pumping through your body and you start experiencing some of these physical symptoms that are associated with adrenaline. They're actually not even associated with these possible conditions that your brain has you convinced is actually the case. So the next characteristic is excessive amounts of time devoted to symptoms or health worries. So this could be in the form of checking. You may be checking your body or scanning your body. If you're looking at a certain mole to see if it's changed shape or if it's gotten bigger, you may be furiously looking at WebMD and trying to fit all of your symptoms into a certain diagnosis. How often does that actually work out, right? So the point is you're spending a tremendous amount of time looking at your body, but also looking at other sources to confirm your diagnosis, which goes nowhere. The next is excessive health-related behaviors. So this can also be too many visits to the doctor. You are, like I said, completely convinced that this is true, and you're going back and forth to the doctor to confirm that this is actually what's going on. You might be thinking that the doctor is an idiot. They obviously didn't see what I see, and I need to keep going back. Another example of this is reassurance seeking. So you may be asking your friends or your family, hey, what do you think about this? Is this normal? Is this typical? Does this happen to you? That's another way of being able to tell that you are obsessing about it and worrying about it quite a bit. Another is avoidance. You may actually have fear of going to the doctor. So people either will be on one side of the spectrum or the other. They're either obsessively going to the doctor or they're not going to the doctor at all because they are very fearful of actually getting the diagnosis. They are also very resistant to any sort of negative side effects from medications. And this can also come in the form of avoiding going out. You may curb your social life. You may avoid social media. You may even avoid exercise because it might exacerbate some of your symptoms. So now let's talk about some of the causes. Keep in mind that anxiety, like a lot of other psychiatric disorders, is inherited. It is genetic. Now, just because it is something that runs in your bloodlines doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be something that you yourself are going to struggle with, but you are more predisposed. It's more likely that you could continue to suffer with anxiety or other psychiatric disorders if other people in your family also suffer from that. So keep that in mind. The next is having a parent who was anxious about an illness while you were growing up. Here again, you had a model of a parent who was experiencing health anxiety, and this kind of created this neural network in your brain that now associates any sort of physical symptom with anxiety and worry. And so you saw this parent going back and forth from the doctor, and this just became an ingrained learned behavior for you too. The next is having a loved one who suffered an illness. Also, death from illness, previous illness, and the doctor had missed something. So here again, we've got a history of actual illnesses, and you've become convinced that, oh, here we go again, the illness has come back, or it's happened to somebody else, so obviously that is exactly what's happening to me. So here's some example of the worry triggers. Unusual or painful sensations in the body, a flare-up of a medical disorder, such as like acid reflux. You start having some acid reflux and all of a sudden the brain has you convinced that you have esophageal cancer. Another example is social media posts or TV. If you are scrolling through your social media or looking at TV and you see other people that have similar symptoms and they have a specific diagnosis, the anxiety has you convinced that that's you as well. Overhearing someone talking about it, something your doctor says, like everything is fine right now. What is the phrase that your anxiety is going to hang on to? Right now. Well, I was fine in the doctor's office, but as soon as I got home, I had the symptoms happening all over again. So I may have been fine then, but I'm not fine now, and I just know that doctor is wrong. Discharge instructions can be very ambiguous and a little scary and very open to interpretation, particularly misinterpretation. Labs being outside of the normal range, even though sometimes it can be normal for your cholesterol to be a little spiked, you are convinced in your brain that you have high cholesterol and you need to be on medication, so forth and so forth. And also waiting for test results can also be very, very anxiety inducing. Okay, so now let's talk about 3 things that you can start doing right now to be able to recover from your health anxiety. So the first thing that I want you to do is to personify and externalize the anxiety. And this can actually work with any form of anxiety. So a good example of this is to treat your anxiety like a monster. It is something that is separate from you. So for example, Me, Ashley, that's who I am. I now think of my anxiety as outside of my body, or it's a part of something that exists within my body that I actually have control over. So the mind and the body are very used to allowing this anxiety to run rampantly. It's in control right now. It's calling the shots. But the moment that you start to switch the conceptualization of the anxiety to be something like a monster, something that's trying to break you down, that's telling you lies, that's trying to convince you of all of these things that are just simply not true. That sounds like a monster, doesn't it? So it makes sense to start treating it like that. You may even want to give it a name so that you can have that separation between self and anxiety, and you can start having some dialogue with it. And what that dialogue sounds like is you fighting back. Fighting back, the first reaction is to not give it any wind, is to not give it any energy. So as soon as you start to notice that you're having some of those anxious thoughts, oh crap, my heart is beating out of my chest, it must mean that I'm having a heart attack. It's just simply not true. That's the monster being a monster. So you want to start to train yourself to ignore it. Completely ignore it, because it is not going to do any good if you continue to give it attention. So the second thing is to learn to live without absolute certainty. This is a really, really tough one and can take a long time. But what we mean by this is that there are so many things in life that do not have certainty, and yet your life keeps living. You still keep going. So here's a good example of that. When you're on a plane, you don't have absolute certainty that the pilot is going to be able to land the plane, right? But you've got just enough certainty to rely on the fact that the plane is actually going to be landed safely. You don't need to have absolute certainty that the pilot has proper training or is actually going to execute that plan. You just need to have enough certainty to be able to trust that it's going to happen. So if you can take this concept and start to apply it to other areas of your life, you can start to begin to live your life with uncertainty. One of the definitions of anxiety, just in general, is the intolerance of uncertainty. The more that you can practice getting in the mindset of being okay with things being uncertain, the better off you'll be. And finally, you want to focus where you do have control. You want to focus on what you're in control of, and you want to learn how to respond versus just simply reacting. Is this something that is in my control? No. I need to let it go, and I need to divert my attention to something that is in my control. And keep in mind that your reaction is simply a reaction. You get to choose how you respond to that reaction. And here's the kicker, is that most of the time, your initial reaction isn't the right one. It's coming from a lot of neural networks, a lot of default programming that has happened from childhood, that's happened over the lifetime. It's this automatic reaction that's trying to keep you safe. It's trying to bring your attention to potential threats in your environment. But it doesn't necessarily mean that that is true. It could be, but more often than not, it's not true, especially as it pertains to anxiety and physical symptoms, health anxiety. So you want to be cognizant of that. Once you have your reaction, have a pause, take a break, take a breath, push back, get away from the subject, and then you get to decide how you're going to respond to those physical symptoms in particular. So that will do it for today. I hope you enjoyed our talk on health anxiety and were able to benefit from understanding how to identify it, and also some 3 tips that you can start implementing right away so that you can start feeling better. Again, look for the guidebook here in the description so that you can get the full workup of how to work through this on your own. Please let us know that you like this video by giving us a thumbs up and subscribing to our channel. Take care.